Hey guys, welcome to Gene Apologetics. This is of course your host, Gene. Please remember to like, comment, and subscribe. Every subscription, like, share, comment, etc. boosts us into the algorithm. Today we're going to focus on a simpler topic since lately, honestly, the channel and my X profile has been veering into these weird, niche topics that maybe don't get as much traction, and we'll be discussing those in upcoming videos anyway. Today I want to be discussing the idea of tradition and patriarchy and relationships and how all that ties into the biblical morality. When you go on Twitter and Reddit and all these other places, you notice these kind of strange creatures who are products of the 2014 to 2016 political awakening here in the West, where a lot of people decided to become conservative and maybe they rediscovered their faith and other things like that. And they started to delve into history, but not in a really deep way. And so they would always say things like, well, I want to go back to the 1950s. 1950s was tradition. Well, no, it wasn't actually, because that was the beginning of the real New World Order. Okay, people say that the New World Order is this conspiracy theory. The world was made anew multiple times, thanks to the Industrial Revolution. We'll discuss that in another video as well. But the point is that after World War II, you got the 1950s. That's not really tradition. That was considered new. How do I know it's new? Because you would leave your single-family home. What's a single-family home? Well, before World War II, I guess we don't really know what that is. In the suburbs. Oh, hang on. Suburbs? What's a suburb? Is that like a suburban area? What's a suburb? Before World War II, I've never really heard of a suburb. Interesting. And you would take your car. You have your own car? A personalized car that can go more than 20 miles without completely combusting? That's incredible. Never heard of that before World War II. And you drive it into the city so you can go to work. Where do you work? In an office. A corporate office. A corporate office? Gee, I haven't heard of that before World War II. I thought we either lived in personal mercantile businesses or family-owned businesses, or maybe factories, and business was conducted in a bank. But what's a corporate office? A corporation? It's kind of interesting. And you go into your own cubicle. A cubicle? What's a cubicle now? Before World War II, I'm not sure what a cubicle exactly is. And then you sit down, you do your work, and then you drive back to your single-family home in the suburbs to meet your cookie-cutter wife and kids, and you have all these toys. Where are the toys coming from? They're made out of metal and stuff like that. The 80s are made out of plastic. What's plastic? This is all totally new to me, apparently. And but apparently this is tradition. All this stuff that's brand new is tradition. And I'm gonna go turn on the TV. TV? What is that? You mean the radio? You're talking crazy here. What is a TV? Television? Television? Is that good for you? What is that? Is that like a radioactive box that shows you the future or something? Again, not everyone owned a TV before the 1950s, and when they did, they were very primitive TVs, and people didn't come back from the office, from their cubicle, and just watch TV 9 hours a day. None of that is tradition, I hate to tell you. Tradition was you live in associated areas with your families, and in the Anglo version of civilization, which proved to be the most individualist, which is what most of the West has managed after, even in that situation, you were still near to family. So even in the individuality and the kind of individual character of society in the Anglo civilization, you were still near a family. And even if you weren't, you were bound by the code and conduct of that societal order. And that's how the British, particularly the English, established their society. We're all our own people, but we're held together by a common societal belief. That is what held them together. And so when the societal belief goes out the window, there's nothing to cohesively bind everything together. And so that's why America, Canada, and the UK, and any country associated with that has now begun to fall apart. And that's why they're doing much worse than other Western countries who are not in the English civilization. Now, there's many great things that the English contributed to the world. In fact, I would say that of all the people in modern history, meaning the last 300 years, they by far have influenced the world more than any other race of people in the last 300 years. That is a fact. They've benefited the world more than any other race in the last 300 years. Yeah, that is a fact. But there are drawbacks. And when you look even at the French, who are associated with being very liberal, they still maintain a lot of their culture, as do Italians, because they have a stronger family knit structure. And even outside of the family knit structure, when you're no longer living next to family, the bond of the culture is much stronger because it's not based just on societal conservatism. So even liberal French people maintain more culture than people living in liberal America and Canada, the non-French portions, and then the UK and other places more influenced by English civilization. So there's the benefit of English civilization, which is individuality. But then there's the issue of it, which is too much individuality is hinging everything on society. But what if society collapses in the way that morality kind of has in the English-speaking West, then there's nothing left to glue it together, because the family unit is not considered as strong. And even the nuclear family in the 1950s was based on the English interpretation of family, which is you and your wife and your kids, and that was kind of it. And you had relatives nearby, that was a bonus. Whereas in much of the rest of Europe and the rest of the world, the family was not you, your wife, and your kids. It was you, your wife, your kids, her family, your family, and we're all going to live kind of near each other, and family is going to be extremely, extremely important. And that is how most of the world has operated and how it continues to operate until today. And that's why when Muslims come to the West, for example, even though in America they tend to be more liberal than other Muslim diaspora, they hold on to their conservatism in a way that other minorities do not, because they have that stronger, cohesive family unit that a lot of other people who have been assimilated in America much longer may not have. And so that's just one example of that. But the point is that this kind of post-World War II, specifically English mindset, is not really tradition, because it's even a post-English civilizational issue as well. Because first of all, after World War II, and even far before World War II, the secularization of the world had begun. Beginning in the West, I mean, particularly. So even that form of civilization wasn't what was considered tradition. So if you're an online ortho-bro or a trad cat or any of these kind of people, tradition is not 1950s form of tradition. Tradition is traditional patriarchy, which in the 1950s wasn't for the most part. It was still some form of light patriarchy, but it wasn't the traditional patriarchy described in the Old Testament. And it wasn't the tradition of having a family unit and a kind of cohesive family. So I hate to break it to you, you can't really be trad if you're just kind of lurking in a basement, sitting around on the internet, debating people 9 hours a day. Being trad means upholding your family structure and your family culture. And if you have people in your family or you may have a family that's dysfunctional and that's not really your fault, that's a different scenario. But being a rebellious teenager is not trad, and saying, oh, I wish I could go back to this time period I was never alive in. Well, if you want to go back to a time period you're never alive in, I suggest you look at actual tradition, which 1950s, even though it was more traditional than today, is not the beacon and the origin of tradition itself. The religious society was to have an actual society based on religious values, and not just this idea of we have a secular nation with religious values. That's also a new idea, as I explain in my new book. But rather, the tradition was the actual clergy are involved in society. And if you don't have clergy in your religion, then the government officials are going to be well versed in the codex of their religion, such as in Muslim countries, particularly Sunni Muslim countries. You don't actually have the imam running the country, but even the state figurehead is going to be extremely religious, and the laws, even in secular Muslim countries in the Arab world, are still based on the Sharia law system. So secularism just means the clergy/imam is not ruling the country, such as in Iran, but the figurehead, whether you're in Egypt or Libya or Algeria or Jordan, is still going to know the tenets of Islam and enact that throughout the vast majority of their culture. Just as Justinian did with his codex, which was a great bedrock for Western civilization. And that codex was based, like I said many times, on the Torah. So the point of this video is essentially, if you want to be patriarchal, you have to look at the church fathers. You have to look at, more importantly, as well, not more importantly, but of equal importance, the scripture of the Bible. How does the Bible tell us what patriarchy is? What does Moses say about it? What does Jesus Christ say about it? What does the Apostle Paul say about it? And that is where you get the idea of patriarchy from. Another thing is that women have never really rebelled against the traditional form of patriarchy itself. They didn't rebel against the old world. Women weren't part of rebelling against the old world. It was men who rebelled against the old world via industrialization. The best microcosm of this is looking at these nomads from Turkic lands in Central Asia that had preserved the same way of life for thousands of years, now leaving and become the first generation to work in a Soviet factory. That is the end of the old world. Okay, 2023, 2015, that's not the end of the old world. The old world already died before World War II finished. And it was men that killed it. It was non-believing men who killed the old world and rebelled against tradition. Women have only started rebelling after the 1950s because they didn't like the consumerist and materialist and kind of vapid lifestyle that was present in the United States. There's also a lot of conspiracy involved in that, but the point is they rebelled against this kind of plastic version of tradition, which again was better than what we have today, but it wasn't original traditional patriarchy. That's what they rebelled against. They did not rebel against the traditional morals of the Old Testament, and they hadn't for all of history. So if it was so bad that nobody liked it, why did nobody rebel against it until men discovered industrialization, secularism, removing their monarchies, and establishing a republic? That is what was the end and the death of the old world. So please keep that in mind. You can look at the Old Testament for what it says about morality. A man should be the head of the house. Paul says that the man is the image and the glory of God, and women is the glory of man. And for people who say, no, it's talking about like this soul idea, and both of them are the image of God, that doesn't really make sense, because the man would have to literally be God in that context. Because if man is the image and the glory of God, and woman is the glory of man, meaning men and women have to be the same. So woman being the glory of man actually means she's equal to man, would mean that men being the glory of God means we're equal to God, which is blasphemous and incorrect. So Paul is not saying that they're literally the same. It does not mean that women are of a different value. It just means that they don't have the quality of being the image of the male God because they're not male. That's it. Just men are different, as in that they are a more pure representation of God on earth. It doesn't mean women aren't made specially by God. It just merely means that man is the image of God. And there's no apology that I'm going to give for that, because that's exactly what the text says. And that's how most of the church interpreted it for all of history. This idea that, no, actually, the image of God is a vague soul, and anything that has a soul is the image of God. Well, by that value, then, so are dogs and cats, because the Bible says that animals have nephesh, which is the soul or the vivacity of life. So you have to be very careful with these kind of words that you throw around. Anything with living energy is the image of God. Then why don't we just believe in emanationism and pantheism, which, by the way, is against the Bible. There is no emanationism and pantheism in the Bible. So anyway, that is the idea of traditional patriarchy summed up, a little bit of history. Hope you guys enjoyed. Catch you later.